Automotive Diagnostics. The name Diagnostic is a big part of your name. How did you guys get your start, and why did you pick Diagnostics as your name?
When I started out, I was a drivability tech, and when we got the business going, I just chose the diagnostic end of it, and it led into everything: full repair, performance.
What year did you start at this?
95.
95. So you started out with the niche of just doing diagnostic.
Well, I started out as a tech in the early 80s doing diagnostics.
Well, diagnostic has totally changed from back there in that day. What is the number one change you would say?
Sophistication of the computers, all the diagnostic equipment and scan tools, electronics that you have to work on them now.
Well, and that's the one point, is that diagnostic, it's literally a software game. I mean, how many scanners do you have, and how many cars can you talk to? I mean, that's a big part of it. And some people think of the auto parts store, and you can go in there and they'll plug into your car and they'll give you a few pieces of information. That's only maybe 1/10 of what's really out there, if even that. Agreed?
Correct. It might lead them to the right circuit where the problem starts, but there's a lot of diagnostics that has to go to actually pinpoint where the problem is in that circuit.
And we've talked about this here on shows recently, and Mason's over there. He's kind of quiet, but we recently had a car that we got in our shop, a Ford Thunderbird, and the guy had been to the dealership 2 times to get this thing running right. And then when he gave up on that, he actually went to another independent auto repair facility, and that guy told him it was a transmission problem. So that's how it ended up at my shop. From my shop, we road tested it, and we did feel a transmission problem. Shop number 2 was right on that. They were wrong. It still had an engine misfire. So I called the customer and I said, hey, we know we've got a little bit of a transmission problem. It's not a major one, but we really, in order to diagnose the transmission, we need to get the engine running right. So I took it up to the guys at ADS, because anytime it's, there's easy things to diagnose, and that's great, but there's also hard ones too. And this one had obviously been to 3 shops before mine to be at the 4th shop, Automotive Diagnostics. So and you found some bad coils on it.
Yeah, actually, after a short test drive, we did notice a misfire on there and brought it back to the shop and did a little bit of diagnostics on there and found a number 7 ignition coil was bad. And that particular one happened to have a updated part number for the coils. There were a known problem on there, so did coils and spark plugs on there and took care of that end of the problem.
Took care of that end of the problem. And there was no code. There was nothing in the computer that said there was a misfire. And when I drove it, the only reason I knew it was a misfire was my seat of the pants feel of the car. I've been driving cars. I drive 30 cars every week. So I know what they feel like, how they should be. So I knew we had a misfire, but there was no P0300 code or misfire code. So even if you went to the auto parts store and they plugged into it, they wouldn't see it. But what you saw is that you saw a misfire in the data. There's a misfire counter that you can look at and you say, man, this thing's misfiring 5 times. Is that 5 times a minute? Is that what it's picking up?
No, 5 times on each basically power cycle or every revolution of the engine. Actually, on one of the data streams, we can see what's called a power balance, and you can see on the graph that cylinder's not contributing during the power cycle.
So that's a lot more information that you would see just plugging into the scanner here at Acme Auto Parts or whatever. So I really want to take this segment to explain to people. There is so much that goes into diagnostic, and the guy that plugs in at Acme Auto Parts is just barely scratching the surface. And there's depths, there's guys that can take it further than I can take it, and we take it pretty far. And for us, what we do is we partner up with shops like Automotive Diagnostics. If there's an engine runnability issue, these guys have got a dynamometer, which we can talk about later, that they can really test these cars and put them in running situations that I can't duplicate. Up first this segment, we're going to go with Richard in Mesa. It looks like on a 2005 Ford Focus. Go ahead, Richard. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call, guys.
You bet.
Here's my problem. I've got a 2005 Ford Focus, automatic transmission, 2-liter. Between 30 and 40,000 miles, I developed a bad vibration while in drive at a stop. Finally, around 39,000 miles, somebody said, change the right front motor mount. That'll take care of it. Well, I did, and it took care of it. The car ran like brand new. About 2,000 miles later, it started to vibrate again. Same way. So I replaced the motor mount, again. It seemed to help the vibration somewhat, but didn't take care of it totally. It seems as though heat and cold, both engine temperature and outside temperature, affect the vibration. Again, it seems as though when it's the engine warms up, or when it's rather warm outside, the vibration goes away. So
Okay.
I've replaced the throttle position sensor and the air flow sensor, not the mass airflow sensor, but the airflow sensor.
Okay. Well, I think Mason's looking at me like he thinks he knows what's going on with your car. Any thoughts that come right to the top for you, Mason?
Probably a couple problems. You got notoriously weak motor mounts on those to begin with, so what you noticed is that they wore out fairly early in a short amount of mileage. The problem with only replacing one of them is the rest of the motor mounts are also weak at the same time, so you're kind of hiding the problem a little bit just by replacing one, when most likely you probably need to replace all of them. The other reason you're noticing it at different temperatures is, for one, the softness of the rubber, if you want to put it that way, and the motor mounts can change, and also your idle speed, depending whether it's hot or cold, can also vary slightly, so it may be more pronounced at different idle speeds.
Excellent answer. I think that's right on the money. As far as motor mounts go, it sounds like, good motor mounts will mask an engine that's not quite running perfect. So he did a couple things to try maybe make the engine run smoother. And then also buying one motor mount at a time. Buying one motor mount at a time is not generally a good idea. Let's take a front-wheel drive car. There's typically 4 motor mounts. There's one underneath the radiator. There's one at the back side down by your feet or on the firewall. So just other side of your feet, there's one there. There's one on the passenger fender, so to say, or on the strut tower. And then there's one on the driver's side fender. So at Tri-City Transmission, what we always do is replace them as a pair. So let's say your front one underneath the radiator is broken. Well, all that means is the back one is trashed because it hasn't been battling the vibration of the engine as a pair, because the motor's going to rock front to back, front to back. So it's like a rubber band. You can only stretch a rubber band out so many times before it's going to decide to break. And that's what engine mounts do. So, hey, Richard, thanks so much for the call. And Mason, that was a great answer. So we're going to go with Doug in Scottsdale on a 2004 Lexus. Go ahead, Doug. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
Thanks. How you guys doing today?
We're doing great.
Good. Hey, this is my wife's car, and it's got an unusual, irritating transmission symptom. When you come up to let's say a rolling stop, for example, if you exit off the freeway and then at the end of the exit, you roll into a right-hand turn. As you slow down for the intersection and begin to accelerate, there's a very long hesitation before the transmission kicks in. And it seems like it might be getting worse, but I can't tell if it's related to the temperature. I don't know if that's possible. But it's getting to the point where now you need to make sure that you've got a big, clear lane of traffic, because you never know when it's going to kick in. So I don't know what's causing that.
How many miles are on that Lexus, Doug?
It's funny you ask. It's got about 76,000, and I just had the tranny completely flushed by a real good company down in Tempe you probably heard of. And they did the road test, and to kind of go along with the fact that it's intermittent, they passed the road test. So, they obviously didn't notice it, and it doesn't happen all the time. But when it happens, it's very pronounced and very disturbing, because it catches you off guard, and before you know it, traffic behind you is just crawling up behind you.
Right. Well, what you're describing to me is a coasting downshift. The transmission that's in that Lexus more than likely is a U240. So you're kind of rolling up to a stop, the light turns green, and you go ahead and get it back. So the transmission's got to re-engage. And if it's intermittent, it is tough on the shop. That's you guys are looking at me like that's the toughest problems we deal with. If you're nice to those guys down in Tempe and you give them a little bit of time with the vehicle, they'd be happy to put a pressure gauge on it and a scanner on it and take it to lunch, take it for errands, run the car around as much as they can to see if we can catch it in the act and know what to go after. But more than likely, we see a lot of pressure regulator valves wear out in that transmission. Certainly it's 70,000, 80,000 miles on a Toyota transmission. It's got a ton of usable life left in it. So it's not something where we got to pitch the whole transmission. There's a very good possibility the valve body can either be repaired or replaced. But it is going to take time at the shop to, for them to find it. Otherwise, it's just a shot in the dark. We've got to prove in order to diagnose. Mason, you look like you got a thought about that one.
No, I agree with you too. It takes some time sometimes to duplicate the problems on there.
So, and it's not something to be ignored. We had a caller, I think it was several weeks back. He had a Toyota Highlander, and the only time it would act up would be on a 6% grade when he was driving up to Payson. And the car would shift down from third gear to second gear, and it hit really hard. But when he drove it drove great. We could not duplicate the situation. So he was headed out of town. I said, "Can I have the thing for a couple days? I'm going to literally drive it up, to the Saguaro Lake, just past the Saguaro Lake exit. There's a nice hill. We went up it and down it and back up it, turned around, and we kept running the hill with a pressure gauge on it and a scanner. It literally took 2 technicians. But what we called for, and that's really the same transmission as what you have in your Lexus, was a pressure regulator valve. So we were able to pull it out, ream the valve, put a new valve in there, and take care of it. So we're going to go to Liz in Goodyear. Looks like on a 2002 Volvo. Go ahead, Liz. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
Good morning. How are you?
Not too bad. What's going on with your Volvo?
My Volvo has been, it's as I said, 2002, and it has quite a few miles on it, 54,000 miles on it. But, of course, it's paid off, and I wanted to see if it's worth me to put the financial efforts into it to keep it running so that I can, go ahead and trade it in and get another car for that kind of money to repair it. So it has a slight leak. It has an oil leak, and I put some of that leak stop stuff in it, and it seemed to slow it down a bit. But I'm wanting to get someone to check over it. I've also been told it's a transmission problem that may be coming up, but they said, just drive until it goes. So anyway, I wanted to get somebody to run a diagnostic on it, see what I'm looking at financially, so I can determine, is it worth putting the money into it with the miles I have on it, because I know they're reliable, or do I just need to come to reality that it's time to let it go?
Do you feel any transmission problems when you drive it?
Well, I feel like if I'm describing it properly, like I can feel like ridges or something when it goes to shift sometimes, but it seems like that's only in the early stages of shifting.
Right. Well, it kind of sounds like to me that you need more than just a diagnostic. You may need the transmission diagnosed. That's just one component. But you're thinking about, hey, do I invest in this car going forward? And I kind of have a little rule of thumb, because every time you hit a 100,000 mile mark, so at 100,000 miles, you got to invest in the car. At 200,000 miles, you got to invest in the car. And I'm not sure how much investment you did at 200,000 miles, but now we got 250,000 miles. Before you do any major repairs to that thing, the car really, it's kind of like getting on the scale. We may not want to get on it to find out what we really weigh, but we still have to. So not only do you want a diagnostic for the issues you might be having, you really want somebody to look that car over top to bottom and find out everything wrong with it, just so you can see what it is. But you don't want to kind of get a half idea and invest a few $1,000s to have something big coming down the road. What do you got? Any thoughts, Matt?
Yeah, that's why we do, I call it the comprehensive vehicle inspection. You're at a decision point in this car, very likely. I really don't like people to say just drive it until it blows up, so to speak, because that you can very well ruin a perfectly good car like that. So I think the best thing to do is go in, find a shop, bumpertobumperradio.com. It's actually Chandler Motors is one of our Volvo specialists, and let them go front to tail on that car, look everything over. They know the pattern failures. They know the issues that you're going to potentially have, and if you gather all your repair history, service history, they'll comb through all that. Then you can come up with a plan, and that plan may say, "No, it's time to bail. Let's just do some teenagers' first car that they want to drive it for a couple years and just struggle along with it." Or they might say, "Yeah, we're going to need to do this repair to the transmission, and we've got this and that," and then you're good for another 30,000 miles. And hey, that's maybe you have to spend a little bit of money, but it's going to cost you $300 or $400 a month to drive a new car. So you make money by driving your old cars.
as well. I go through some of that.
Well, Greg, what do you think? High mileage car, 250,000 miles. What thoughts are scratching your mind?
Well, I'm a big fan of high mileage cars because I own them. I'm with Matt. If do a complete check over on the vehicle and find out what it really needs right now and make the decision if it's going to be worth putting the money in now or if it is time to release the car.
Well, he made a good point there about pattern failures. So we see the same things happen over and over and over again. When I see a 2002 Volvo, the first thing that pops into my mind is radiators leaking into the transmission. It's a real common one that there was bulletins about and lawsuits. If there wasn't lawsuits, there should have been. But there's pattern failures that we see, and we have a couple of great Volvo specialists at bumpertobumperradio.com. We've got Tanner Motors, who's off of Coulter, and then we've got in the far east valley, we've got Mesa Auto Works. So those are a couple of good sources, so you can decide what the right thing to do with your car is. Is it time to, I'm going through the same thing with Rob Hunter. He's on the show after us. I've got his, I believe it's a 1998 Honda Accord, and he says, I've hardly done anything to it. And it's got 180,000 miles on it, and it's making noise when I put it in reverse, and I really don't want to know, but I need to know. And so I said, hey, we're going to find everything wrong with this car, and then we're going to decide how much longer you want to keep it. And, for all intents and purposes, he's going to get another couple years out of it, and we're just going to pick the minimal things to get him by. But we got to have a full picture before we decide to invest in the vehicle. So thanks so much.
Dave, you said one thing, too. We're going to find everything wrong with the car. Just because we find everything doesn't mean we have to fix everything. That's where the communication and the relationship with the shop is so important. We're going to talk about this. We're going to understand how you're going to use the car, the future, and all that. That really plays a big role into it. Talking about it and vetting out expected uses in the future as well.
Well, thanks so much for the call, Liz. We're going to go with John in Maricopa, who's been holding ever so patiently. Go ahead, John. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
Hey, guys.
Hey.
I have a 2002 Dodge Intrepid, and not too long ago I was turning the steering wheel, and I heard a noise, like a spring break, and my airbag light came on. They said there's a coil spring in the steering column. How is that what it is, and how big of a deal is it to change that?
Well, looks like Mason knows your answer. Go ahead, Mason.
The thing in your steering column is actually called a clock spring. It's a ribbon, a cable that's coiled inside of a housing. You hadn't had any kind of power steering rack replaced or anything like that before that happened?
No, he's already, yeah. So I think, definitely a clock spring.
Okay, yeah, it's definitely a clock spring problem.
It's as far as replacing it, what has to happen?
Basically just it's pretty easy. You just pull the steering wheel and the clock spring assembly comes out of there with a cable attached to it, hooked up to your airbag harness.
Now, you said easy. That's easy to you because you're a technician. Would that be easier to do it yourself, or we got an airbag in there? Is that a do-it-yourselfer project?
No, generally anything to do with the airbag or something like that's not a do-it-yourself project.
So hopefully that helps you out there, John, on your 02 Dodge Intrepid. I think it's a fairly common thing when the car's got 100,000, 125,000 miles on it. But that cable or that ribbon has to follow the steering wheel and still keep the connection. So as many times, and what Mason was starting to go to, is that when the rack and pinion gets replaced, sometimes that thing gets a few extra turns than it normally might get. So I think he was going there with that. So anyway, thanks so much for the call. Well, fuel injection. Which fuel should I be running in my car? And I've heard some personalities say, oh, yeah, 87 octane is all you need to spend money on. And Matt had wrote the most recent blog for Bumper to Bumper Radio that's on KTAR. I don't think it's up as of yet. But the point was, as gas prices get up, we're getting up to $4 a gallon some places, and the tendency is want to go ahead and throw the 87 octane in the car to save a few dollars. And then sometimes on the other end, when it's not so much to save money, some people think they're doing a good thing and they're putting in the the 91, 92 octane in lieu of the 87, and is that doing them any benefit? So right off the bat, what are your initial thoughts?
I firmly believe in running what the vehicle was recommended to run on. When you run premium fuel, if that's what the vehicle was designed to run on, you're going to get your best performance and your best fuel economy. If you're going to put in a lower octane fuel to save money, you're not going to. You're going to have higher wear and tear. You're probably going to have 10 to 20% lower performance if the computer starts retarding the timing because it's picking up all the knock.
Well, and before the show, I asked you, I said, what do you think? And you said, hey, we've got I think it was a late model 2008 Cadillac Escalade, and you can literally look on the scanner, and you can see that the computer is retarding the timing from its normal place by 10 degrees?
It was pulling the specified timing by as much as 10 degrees.
Just to compensate for the bad fuel, in which case he called the consumer and said, you're not running 87 octane by chance, are you? If you can afford the Cadillac, you got to be able to afford the 92 octane. As much as we want to say, yeah, you can save some money, a few bucks a gallon, there's no benefit to it. And another point in Matt's article, and you can chime in here, Matt, on this if you want, but I've got a vehicle that doesn't require me. It doesn't say on the dashboard, it doesn't say premium fuel only. It doesn't say it on the fuel cap, premium fuel only. But there's no sense if you have that type of vehicle. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I didn't quite hear all that, Dave. I went over and switched my phone off from mute as I actually pull into the studio parking lot right now. But, yeah, I mean, it's a waste of money to use the premium if you don't need it as well, because it's going to ignite later in the combustion process, and that's not when the manufacturers and engineers design this stuff. That's not how they wanted it to burn. So it's going to have a counter effect on it. It's not worth it. And just like Greg said, and I said in the article, stick with what they said. That should be your best bet for efficiency and everything else. Especially like on a turbocharged car or something like that, you can really melt them down.
Well,
using the wrong fuel.
Right. Now, the other thing that happens is, in the old days, we were used to buying additives, cleaners, for fuel injection or whatever it may be, or an octane boost, that type of thing. And fast forward to the future, we've got top-tier fuels. And top-tier fuels already have those additives in them. So you don't have to buy anything to put in your gas can, with your fuel. So does everyone, Matt, you did the research on this, does everyone have a top-tier fuel, or is that select brands?
Select brands, and it's in the blog, which should be on KTAR.com on Monday. But there's a website, toptierfuel.com, and that's got all, Chevron, QT, Shell, and it's just got the additives in there that help prevent the carbon buildup. And even though the carbon buildup, the preventers and the detergents are in there, it's still going to happen. But, Acme Fuel or whatever, theirs don't have it. Costco, for example, they're not rated as a top-tier fuel, and again, this is in my article, but they have 5 times the detergents, and they inject theirs right on site. And blend it right on site. And the only reason they're not rated as a top-tier fuel is because they don't have those injection deals at all their stations nationwide quite yet. But so that's good gas, good fuel, and it's important. Occasionally, if you want to use a Chevron product called Techron or an additive once in a while, I'm not a big believer in the additives. There's only 2 or 3 that I ever recommend. And
well, Every time I talk to the guys from ADS, because they have a fuel injection test machine at their shop, and every time I leave from talking to them, I feel insignificant because they have better tools than I do. But they're able to test and clean fuel injectors. So we're going to go with Oakley with a 1997 F-150. Go ahead, Oakley. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio. Go ahead, Oakley. All right, we're going to come back to Oakley, and we will try Jeff on a 2004 Chevrolet Blazer. Go ahead, Jeff. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
Thanks. Actually, it's a 2004 Trailblazer, and I've got this issue going where the oil gauge before was kind of going up and down all the time. Now it's just dropped all the way to the bottom. We ran the code meter on it. A friend of mine has one, and it came up. It was a camshaft sensor, and in fact, the mechanic had told me that too. So we replaced the camshaft sensor, and which is pretty easy because it was right up in the front on the top, and still having the problem. So I went online, checked around, and some places said, try the oil sensor, something or other. Anyway, so it's still doing the same problem. I've replaced both of them and can't seem to figure it out. So I guess the next question is, do I take them to a mechanic and let them try to figure it out, or is there something else I can try?
You started out with an oil pressure question, it sounded like, and then we got over to camshaft. So I lost you. I disconnected there.
So are you saying that the oil pressure gauge on the dash is reading 0, right?
It is now. Yeah, it was. But what it was doing before was kind of bouncing around, not doing anything, or just kind of never staying in the same place. And it would say, it had a little light on it that said check gauges.
You never got a low end knock, and when I refer to a low end knock, it's a clattering that you get from the engine when there's low oil pressure.
No, nothing like that. Once in a while, and I was told Trailblazers kind of have this effect that they do this when it's the camshaft sensor. So when the gauge light, or when not the gauge light, but when also the check engine light came on, and we checked the sensor, we checked the gauge, and it came up that it was the camshaft sensor. I had a friend that said, I've had one of these before. You replace that, so my wife would pull up to a stop sign or up to a light or whatever, and sometimes it would just die.
Okay, I think Matt looks like he's got something on his mind here.
There's a couple different things. I mean, you need to make sure you have good oil pressure by doing a manual pressure test. The gauge very well may be bad, but it could be the gauge or it could be the sensor. But if that sensor is providing bad information to the computer's not going to adjust the engine properly, because I'm pretty sure that Trailblazer engine has variable valve timing. And that uses oil pressure to adjust that. And the computer may not let that happen if it doesn't think it has the right amount of oil pressure. So we definitely have there's two distinctly different problems. And we need to first start by making sure that we have good oil pressure, mechanically have good oil pressure. If the instrument cluster is not working, I don't believe that's going to affect the way the engine management system adjusts the variable valve timing. But that's why on the Trailblazers, or any car, the oil changes are just so critical, because there's such small passages where they rely on that high pressure oil, and if they get carboned or coked up with sludged up with oil, they just don't work well.
Well, since we got the guys from Automotive Diagnostics, we were talking diagnostics in the first segment, and should I take it to a mechanic? Should I go there? And believe it or not, you've already bought one camshaft sensor, you've already bought another camshaft sensor, and now we're what part do we put on there next? Absolutely, it needs to be diagnosed. I mean, we can get lucky, and we can, but it needs to be diagnosed. It will save you money in the long run. And some projects are, hey, that thing's real easy to change out. Maybe it's worth the gamble. Maybe it's a $20 or $30 part. And
it's fun to have a homeowner project and try it, but you got to know your limits and then stop. After you've spent $20 or $30, $50 maybe, know your threshold going in and then bail out at the right time before you get in over your head.
For sure. Well, let's go with, looks like Jim in Gilbert on a 2009 Toyota Camry. Go ahead, Jim. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
Hi. Thanks for taking the call. Question on brakes. I usually do my own brakes. So this is the first time I've had front and rear disc brakes. And wondering, do the front and rear pads need to be changed at the same time? And when turning the rotors, you need to turn the front. Well, how about switching the rotors from the rear to the front like rotating tires and rotating rotors? Do they wear more on the front than the rear like the old drum brakes used to?
No, and I think it's a great question. But, I mean, really the front brakes are going to be the brakes to wear out first.
Typically,
because the majority of your braking is in the front, so you're going to see those go away first, and you don't have to do them at the same time. In the old days, we would, machine the front rotors and brakes for the first brake job, and it was always a clean and adjust on the rear brakes, because in your old drum brakes, the pedal height came from the rear drum, but there is no rotation of brake rotors.
No, yeah, the front and rear parts, I'd say just about, on some, you might find a car where they're interchangeable front to rear, but no, that wouldn't be a normal ordinary course of doing anything. So yeah, they're treated differently. You're going to replace the front based on wear, and you're going to replace the rear based on wear. You do need to machine the rotors. A lot of cars you just replace the rotors. They're not expensive at all in some cases, and some manufacturers don't want them machined. Some of the Volvos and European cars, it's better just to use new ones. But the other thing on the rear brakes, on the calipers, you've got to be very careful. In a lot of the late model cars, they've got anti-lock brakes, stability control. There could be a lot of pressure waiting to be unleashed on those calipers, and if you're not careful, you could put yourself in a real dangerous situation. Not to mention on the rear brakes, you've got to have the right tools to collapse the calipers because the parking brake is integrated, and so I'd maybe do the fronts yourself, but I'd probably defer to a professional for the rears.